Okay, so this is for the Jones article, and just to clarify, if I do say any page numbers, it is in accordance to how the pages were in the document on D2L rather than the prologue pages and then chapter 1. So anyway, so it starts with the prologue. I don't know if I understood the prologue more just because I was more awake, or if it just made more sense to me. But it's just kind of an overview of exactly what she was going to talk about in her book. Her and about self-imaging was one of the things that was said a lot. Exactly, a quote from 3/4 was self-image will take up concept of our experience of world as representational one and of body/self as itself representational. So there's a lot of talk about the idea of signifier, or sign, referential, and who's the model. So this obviously has to, not obviously, but I mean, it has to do with art. The way that she's talking about it was about art that was going on and how it, and when I say art, I think of it as not performance art, unless we're talking about, oh gosh, her name is escaping me one moment. It's Wrist. That's her last name. That's the only idea of performance art, as well as the idea of Peter Gabriel's was a good, interesting example as well of performance art to me. Some of the main ideas that she went by over Jones, I think that's a female. I didn't know if that picture of her was that on the cover. Anyway, she talks about technologies, and when she says technologies, she's not talking about exactly cameras, although she's thinking technologies as ways that art are being made. That's what my idea of what she was talking about was, and how her prologue was basically about what she was going to go over based off of what the body is, and also she gave some interesting examples of the idea of how she says on page 4 about the never enough, which also comes up in chapter 1. Visual culture artifacts embrace promise of image to deliver all, but ultimately obsessively trace and so iteratively expose the never enough. So it focuses on the use of technologies as well as how it's interpreted and rendered, and the subject is usually the model, and in a lot of instances that means that the subject is a person. And then, oh yeah, I can't remember, hold on, I can't remember if this was in chapter 1 or the prologue, when she talks about the idea of how in the Renaissance, the idea of how all art was a body, and that even if you take the idea of Jackson Pollock, that every art was seen as a body. And I wasn't, that was a question I have. I guess that's a question I can pose right now, as one of my questions is, what does she mean, a body as in a body of art, or a body as in a human body? Or maybe the wording was human and I just blanked out. So yeah, that was what it's the referent, which was one doing the thing / body, the signifier being the sign, and then the receiver, the audience. So then there's chapter one. So through this chapter, she talks about the shifts from the Renaissance. So kind of the 18th and 19th century to the 20th and 21st century, and talks about the ideals that went along with it. Some of the more important ones are the aesthetics. Also, Alberti, she goes on a lot about the dicks at the beginning of the chapter, and then talks about the shift from kind of seeing God to seeing the artist as God. She mentions kind of Andy Warhol and the ideal of a heterosexual man being a hero, an art genius, um, and then also kind of comparing Mel Gibson to that ideal, which I don't really like him, so I don't want to go on about him. Um, but anyway, so um, then she kind of goes to postmodernism as well. And one of the interesting things that I found, although she doesn't agree with it, she said, was something that DeBoer and Baudrillard say. It's page 28. They're two, I guess, idealists. That's not the word, but whatever. Um, is they say the scene and the mirror no longer exist. Instead, there is a screen and network. So there's a lot to this chapter that I can't really go over all of it, unfortunately, because I only have like 30 more seconds. Um, but yeah, there's just, I guess another question I had was the quote, seeing takes on the magnitude of knowing. 15 and 16. Seeing takes on the magnitude of knowing. What does that mean? I mean, that's it. I had a really hard time understanding his chapter, but I tried my best. I really did.